Today we're talking about cells. So our bellwether question is going to be, what is a cell? Think back to 6th grade science. You learned about plant cells, you learned about animal cells, some similarities and differences between those two types of cells. Well, on the screen right now, you see 4 different types of cells that are found in the human body. We have what's called a red blood cell. This helps send oxygen throughout your body. It also helps get rid of the carbon dioxide that is a waste product of respiration. We also have a white blood cell. These are used in the human body to fight infections. Over here on the left, we have a muscle cell. These are designed to contract and then relax to allow your body to move. And then we have this very odd shaped cell here in the middle. This is a neuron. These cells make up your brain and most of your spinal cord. Now, our fact for today is that stomach lining cells are replaced every 2 days. Think about why that would need to happen. What's going on in your stomach? If you thought about digestion and all the stomach acid that you have in your stomach that allows for the food that you eat to be broken down, then you are right. This is why these stomach cells have to be replaced so often. They can't survive in that very acidic environment for very long. So today we're looking at the parts of a cell. We have moved on to our life science unit. We are looking at the state standard today that talks about reproduction being necessary for the continuation of the species. In order to understand how asexual and sexual reproduction occur, we need to understand cell division. And in order to understand the cell division, we need to know the parts of the cell that it's going to go through that process and how things are doubled and what's going on with the chromosomes and all of that when these cells are dividing. By the end of class, you need to be able to explain the function of key organelle in the cell and explain the differences between plant and animal cells. Again, hopefully some of this is a review of 6th grade science. We'll start with cell theory. 3 parts to the cell theory. The first one, all living things are composed of cells. For something to be considered alive, it has to be at least one, or it could be more cells. We do have single-celled organisms, but then we have many multicellular organisms as well. Part 2, cells are the basic unit of structure and function of living things. It is the smallest building block. It is the smallest thing you can have, and it is still alive. The third part says that all cells are produced from other cells. This means that spontaneous generation could not occur. Cells can only come from other cells when they divide. You cannot have things that are not living and that are not composed of cells suddenly creating cells. It doesn't work that way. Cells are coming from the other cells that are already in existence. An organelle is a tiny structure that carries out a specific function within the cell. We're going to talk about a lot of these today as we look at the different parts in an animal cell and a plant cell. We're going to start with the outermost layer. The outermost layer in a plant cell is called a cell wall. It's basically a rigid outer layer of non-living material, and it surrounds the outside of plant cells. Animal cells do not have this layer. Plant cells have the cell wall in order to protect it and also support the cell. This allows the redwoods out in California to be hundreds of feet tall. Even trees here in Ohio are extremely tall in some cases, and it is the cell wall that allows these trees to grow that tall. Right inside the cell wall of a plant cell is what's called the cell membrane. This is also the outermost layer of an animal cell. It's a thin layer that basically controls what goes in and out of the cell. Hopefully it's letting the good stuff in and keeping the bad stuff out. In between the nucleus, which we'll find out what that is in just a second, the area between that and the cell membrane is what's called cytoplasm. It's this area that contains a gel-like fluid, and then it houses most of the organelle. Now, the nucleus of an atom we already talked about. We said it's kind of the center of the atom, and we've got the protons and the neutrons in the nucleus, and then the electrons are flying around on the outside. Well, the nucleus of a cell is going to be the control center. It's kind of the boss of the cell. It tells all of the other parts of the cell what to do. The reason it can do that is because it has the DNA or the chromosomes inside. Now, the chromosomes are made up of something called chromatin. This is strands in the nucleus. They have the genetic material called DNA. We'll talk about what that means very soon. And the DNA is basically the instructions for the cell's function. This is where the directions are for what needs to happen in the cell. Is it a muscle cell? It's got its own set of directions. The neurons are going to have a different type of direction that they're going to need to follow. That chromatin will condense and make chromosomes. These are thread-like structures in the nucleus, and they, again, are made of the DNA. They contain the DNA. Humans have 23 pairs or 46 total chromosomes, and these are the weird X shapes you may have seen before. Now, the 23rd pair of chromosomes in humans is a little different. Here we have one that is an X and a Y. If you look at these other ones, they look pretty similar, but the X and Y chromosome, the 23rd pair, those actually look different, and we're going to find out why they are different later on. Now, every cell needs to have power. It needs to have energy in order to function. So we call the mitochondria the powerhouse. This is where the food particles are broken down to produce most of the cell's energy. When you take a high school biology class, you'll get into how this all happens. But for 8th grade science, you just need to know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse. This is where the food particles are being broken down and the energy is being made. Next, we have the endoplasmic reticulum. This looks kind of like a bunch of pathways that are around the nucleus. The endoplasmic reticulum is the area that carries proteins and other materials from one part of the cell to another. It's kind of like the highway system inside the cell. On the endoplasmic reticulum, you'll find little dots. Those are called ribosomes. You also have ribosomes that are floating out in the cytoplasm throughout both types of cells. Ribosomes are the factories that produce the proteins. And those proteins must be made in order for the cell to do what it needs to do properly. Golgi bodies are something else that are in both plant and animal cells. These are kind of like the postal service. They receive the proteins from the endoplasmic reticulum, they package them the way they need to be, and then they send them on throughout the cell to the locations where they need to go. And again, both a plant cell and an animal cell has Golgi bodies. The next part of the cell we're going to talk about is only in plant cells, and hopefully you'll understand why. These are chloroplasts. They capture sunlight and use it to produce food in a plant cell. Obviously, we humans and other animals on this planet cannot produce their own food, so we do not have the chloroplast to do that. We ingest food. That way we get the energy that we need. Both plant and animal cells have vacuoles. These are storage containers or storage areas for the food, the water, and the waste. Something that's interesting, difference between their vacuoles, is animal cells have many small vacuoles, while the plant cells usually have one large vacuole. If you've ever seen a plant wilt, usually you give it some water and it perks back up. The reason that happens is their main vacuole, if it's a wilted plant, is not very big. It's not full of water. So it kind of, the pressure inside the cell is not very much. So the plant will wilt. Once you add some water to that plant, that vacuole will fill back up, creating more pressure inside the cell, and it will allow the plant to stand upright. Lysosomes are these little areas that contain chemicals to break down large food particles into smaller ones. It also recycles old cell parts. Now, plants, it's rare for plants to have lysosomes. Usually they have lysosome-like vacuoles instead. So more likely to have the lysosomes in the animal cells than the plant cells.